The wooden sword lay on the marble table between them, a simple symbol of freedom that had cost thousands of lives in the arena. Lady Valeria Secundis studied the scarred gladiator standing before her, his massive frame casting shadows across her late husband's study. Outside, the Mediterranean glittered beneath an autumn sun, but inside these walls, winter had settled since Senator Secundis's murder. 3 raids in a fortnight, each more brutal than the last. The household slaves whispered that no mere bandits would dare target a senator's widow. Someone powerful wanted something hidden in this villa. Lucius Aurelius, 27 victories, 9 years undefeated in the arena, now stood before her as her last hope. Could a man who had killed for the entertainment of Rome now protect her from its deadliest shadows? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Valeria adjusted the black mourning stole that had become her second skin these past 3 months. The heavy garment hung from her shoulders, a constant reminder of her changed status in Rome's unforgiving social hierarchy. From respected senator's wife to vulnerable widow in a single night, she watched as Lucius circled her late husband's study, appraising entryways, window heights and sightlines with the calculating eye of a man accustomed to assessing danger. His scarred forearms told stories of arena battles, some inflicted by beasts, others by men equally desperate to live. The attacks began a month after the funeral, he asked, his voice surprisingly cultured for a man who had spent 9 years in the low. Yes, Valeria replied, remembering the solemn procession that had carried Senator Quintus Secundus to his family tomb. The funeral had been a performance of power, more than grief. Senators and merchants alike coming to pay respects while measuring the political vacuum left behind. She had stood dry-eyed beside the pyre, aware of the calculating gazes upon her. A childless widow with a coastal estate was both pitied and coveted in equal measure. The first raid seemed purposeful, she continued. They ignored the silver, the artwork. Instead, they searched my husband's private rooms. Lucius nodded, running a callous finger along the edge of a scroll shelf. And the second, more violent. 2 weeks later, they questioned the house slaves about documents. She swallowed hard. The third attack came 3 nights ago. 2 of my people were killed. The memory was still raw. Finding Demetrius, the elderly Greek, who had taught her to read as a child, his throat cut in the courtyard. Nearby, a young Cassius, barely 16, who had tried to sound the alarm. Senator Cases had visited the following morning with his hollow condolences and a too generous offer to purchase her lands. His eyes had lingered on the vineyard slopes visible through the peristyle. When she declined, his sympathy hardened into something else entirely. My cousin Livia suggested I contact the Ludus Master. Valeria said her husband sponsors games. She said you had earned your freedom with honor, that you might be seeking employment. I was planning to leave Rome, Lucius admitted. The wooden sword buys freedom, not acceptance. A gladiator remains a gladiator in the eyes of patricians. Something in his tone made Valeria look up sharply. You dislike nobles. A slight tightening around his eyes was his only reaction. I dislike anyone who believes birth determines worth. But I need coin to establish myself elsewhere, and you're offering a considerable sum. Valeria moved to the window, looking out at the olive groves that stretched toward the sea. The estate had been her sanctuary since marrying Quintus 15 years ago. At 34, she was now in the precarious position of a woman with property but dwindling protection. Her father had been a successful grain merchant who arranged her advantageous marriage, but those commercial connections had withered after she entered patrician society. I was not born to this, she said quietly. Perhaps that's why they circle like wolves. I lack the family connections that might otherwise shield me. Lucius studied her with new interest. A merchant's daughter. Yes, my husband needed my father's ships and connections. I needed. She paused. Security. The unspoken truth hung between them, that her marriage had been a transaction, not a love match. What she didn't say was how Quintus had grown to respect her mind, inveniously treating her as a confidant rather than merely a well-placed chess piece. These attacks are coordinated, Lucia said, drawing her back to the present danger. Professional, not common bandits. The servants whisper that Senator Cassius. Be careful with names, Lucius interrupted, his voice low. Walls in noble houses have ears. Show me the rest of the villa. I need to understand its weaknesses before nightfall. As they left the study, Valeria caught a serving girl watching them with wide eyes. News of the gladiator's presence would spread through the household by dinner and to neighboring estates by morning. A widow employing a former gladiator would cause scandal, but Valeria had buried scandal alongside her husband. What remained was survival ahead of her. Lucius moved with the contained grace of a predator. Aware of every shadow, every corner, she wondered what it would be like to face him in the arena. This man who had killed for the entertainment of cheering crowds, who now held her safety in those same bloodied hands. By midday, Sud insisted on seeing the aged parchment floor plans of the villa. They spread them across a table in the atrium as the household steward Marcus pointed out recent modifications made during the senator's lifetime. The grain storage connects to the main house through this corridor. Marcus explained, his thin finger tracing the pathway. His voice carried the distinctive accent of Greece, though he'd served the family for 30 years. It would be the most valuable target. We supply 3 military outposts along the coast. Lucius studied the layout with narrowed eyes. These storage rooms near the senator's study. What do they hold? Documents. Valeria answered. Political correspondence, financial records, some family histories, and what might someone be looking for there? Lucius asked. Marcus and Valeria exchanged glances. The steward's loyalty had never been questioned, but discretion remained essential. My husband kept records of his political dealings, she said carefully. Some senators find their memories selective when advantageous. Lucius nodded, understanding the unspoken. The wealthy and powerful of Rome maintained their positions through intricate networks of favors, threats, and strategic information, particularly those climbing from lesser origins, as her husband had. These garden walls are too low, Lucius noted, and this servant's entrance is completely hidden from the main courtyard. The senator valued his privacy, Marcus explained. Visitors often came who preferred discretion. Now those same design choices make this place indefensible, Lucius muttered as they continued their tour. Household slaves stopped their work to stare openly at the gladiator. His fame had preceded him, the undefeated Hispanian champion of the coastal arenas. To them, having Lucius Aurelius in their midst was like finding a living legend at the kitchen table. Livia, Valeria's personal slave and closest confidant, joined them at the vineyard's edge. The young woman had served Valeria since before her marriage and remained her most trusted companion. The vineyard workers are asking if the rumors are true, Livia whispered as they walked between rows of autumn bear vines. That you've hired the butcher of Capua to protect us. Lucius's jaw tightened at the arena name. I never accepted that title. Men rarely choose what history names them. Valeria observed. They reached the vineyard's highest point, where the land offered a commanding view of the entire estate. The sprawling main villa, with its red-tiled roof, the separate bath complex, the olive groves, and beyond them, the deep blue of the Mediterranean stretching to the horizon. This is why they want your land, Lucius said. Perfect harbor access, defensible high ground, established crops, and those grain stores. In the right hands, this estate could control the entire coastal supply route. Valeria had known this intellectually, but hearing it stated so plainly made her position even more precarious. My husband's rivals have been circling since before his body was cold. Senator Cassius offered to protect me through marriage. He's 30 years my senior. with 4 previous wives conveniently deceased. And the others, Tribune Flavius, suggested I sell at half the property's value for my safety. Of course, 3 merchant families have made similar approaches. At the mention of Flavius, Rufus, the grizzled vineyard overseer, spat on the ground begging the Dominus pardon, but that man's been measuring our boundaries for years. His men frequently appear on our northern border, claiming confusion over property lines. A commotion from the main house interrupted them. A messenger had arrived, dusty from the road, bearing a sealed letter. Valeria recognized the seal of her cousin's husband. The raids on your estate weren't isolated incidents, Lucius read aloud after Valeria had broken the seal. 3 other properties along the coast have been targeted, all belonging to families connected to your husband's political faction. Valeria took the letter back, scanning the details. This is coordinated, but why? Quintus was influential, but hardly the faction's leader. Perhaps he knew something the others didn't, Lucius suggested, or had something they wanted. As they returned to the main house, Valeria noticed how effortlessly Lucius assessed each person they passed. The way he categorized threats, noted which slaves avoided eye contact, which ones seemed too interested in their conversation. You think someone inside the household is helping them, she said when they were alone. Lucius didn't deny it. Large households always have divided loyalties, money, threats, promises, many ways to turn someone. Who would you suspect? Everyone, he answered simply, until proven otherwise. Night was falling as they completed their circuit of the estate. Torches were being lit along the pathways, creating pools of light in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow, Lucius would begin organizing the household's defense. But tonight would determine if their enemies would strike again, testing the villa's new protector. Night had fallen by the time Lucius was shown to his quarters, a small but comfortable room adjacent to the main courtyard, strategically positioned to respond to any disturbance. He set down his meager belongings, a bundle of clothing, a short sword granted to Fredridman, and a cloth-wrapped package he placed carefully beneath the bed. He washed the day's dust from his face and hands, still unused to the luxury of private bathing water. 9 years in the Lotus had taught him to value such simple dignities. The cool water brought memories flooding back, of his capture in the hills of Hispania, of the slave ship that brought him to Italy's shores, of his first brutal months in the Gladiator school, where 3 arters of new recruits died before ever seeing the arena. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. A house slave delivered a tray with bread, cheese, cured meats and a jug of watered wine, better fare than he'd expected. After the slave departed, Lucius retrieved the wrapped package from beneath the bed and carefully unfolded the cloth. The gladiator helmet gleamed dully in the lamplight, bronze and iron, shaped to resemble a snarling beast. This had been his face to the roaring crowds, the visage that had made women swoon and men cheer as he carved his way through opponents. He ran his fingertips over the dents and scratches, each marking a moment when death had passed him by with narrow margins. The Lutus master had offered to buy it when Lucius earned his freedom, knowing its value as a relic of the famous Hispanian, but some burdens a man carried with him, if only to remember what he had survived. Lucius rewrapped the helmet and returned it to its hiding place. He had never intended to enter another noble house. After earning the wooden sword, he had planned to purchase land far from Rome, perhaps near the northern frontier, where a man's past mattered less than his willingness to work. He had saved nearly every coin earned through his victories, living frugally even after gaining fame. The sum Lady Valeria offered would double his savings, enough to buy twice the land he had hoped for, perhaps even afford a few slaves to work it. 1 season of service to guarantee a lifetime of independence seemed a reasonable exchange, yet something about the widow unsettled him. Not her beauty, though she possessed that in the quiet, dignified manner of patrician women. It was the intelligence in her eyes, the way she had navigated her precarious position thus far. She was neither the helpless noble lady he had expected, nor the calculating manipulator common among Rome's elite. She was authentic in a world where authenticity was a liability. Lucius took a long drink of wine, reminding himself that such observations were dangerous. He was here as a hired sword, nothing more. His education had been an accident of fate. His first owner before the looters had been a retired teacher of rhetoric, who recognized the young Hispanian's quick mind. For 3 years, between bouts of hard labor, the old man had taught him to read and write in both Latin and Greek, had exposed him to poetry, philosophy and history. A secret education that would later save his life when literate slaves fetched higher prices at auction. That unexpected gift had made him a curiosity in the looters, a fighter who could quote Virgil between bouts, who scratched verses into wax tablets while other gladiators diced and hoarded away their meager earnings. The Lutus master had used it as part of his mystique, the philosopher-warrior, the poet with bloody hands. Lucius finished his meal and began methodically checking the room for vulnerabilities. Loose window latches, hollow sections of wall, creaking floorboards that might announce an intruder. Old habits from the Lotus, where new fighters quickly learn to secure their few possessions or lose them. As he worked, he considered Lady Valeria's situation with a strategist's eye. If her husband had indeed possessed damaging information about powerful men, her enemies would not rest until they had recovered or destroyed it. The raids would continue, likely growing more desperate and violent. He had signed on to guard a widow's property. Now he wondered if he had stepped into a viper's nest of Roman politics, the very world he had hoped to leave behind. From his window he could see a light still burning in the senator's study. The widow was working late, perhaps reviewing the very documents others killed to obtain. Lucius made a mental note to speak with her about securing whatever information had made her a target. Dawn would come early, and with it the work of transforming a household of domestic slaves into something resembling a defensive force. He doubted their enemies would grant them much time to prepare. Lucius paced the darkened corridors of the villa, his footfalls deliberately audible. Let any watching eyes know the household was now guarded. Midnight had come and gone, and most of the estate slept. Only the kitchen slaves still worked, preparing dough for tomorrow's bread. His third circuit brought him to the senator's study. The door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of lamplight spilling onto the mosaic floor. Lucius had secured that door himself at sunset after Valeria retired to her chambers. Drawing his short sword, he approached silently, years of arena training allowing him to move without sound when necessary. He pushed the door open with the blade's tip. Lady Valeria stood at her husband's desk, a easel oil lamp illuminating scattered documents. She looked up startled. "Forgive me," Lucius said, sheathing his weapon. "I secured this room earlier. I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice tight with tension. "Someone has been here." Lucius entered immediately, scanning for threats before focusing on her words. "How can you tell this lockbox?" She gestured to an ornate wooden chest with bronze fittings. Quintus kept it organized meticulously. The contents have been disturbed. Lucius examined the box. No visible damage to the lock. What's missing? That's what concerns me. Nothing appears taken, merely examined. She ran her fingers through the parchments. These are senatorial records, voting histories, private agreements, political leverage. Lucius observed. Yes, she hesitated. My husband maintained extensive records of favors granted and owed. It was how he navigated Senate politics as a man without family connections. Lucius studied the windows, the door lock. No signs of forced entry, meaning someone has a key, Valeria concluded, her expression hardening. Someone in my household. A distant noise interrupted them, the distinctive sound of breaking pottery from the direction of the eastern portico. Lucius extinguished their lamp with one swift movement. "Stay here," he ordered. "Bar the door behind me." He slipped into the corridor, eyes adjusting to the darkness. More sounds now, muffled voices. A slave's frightened cry cut short. Lucius moved toward the disturbance. Keeping to the shadows of the colonnade, 3 men in dark tunics had entered through the garden entrance. One held a struggling kitchen slave, hand clamped over her mouth. The others carried short swords. the weapons of professionals, not common thieves. Lucius assessed his options. He could raise the alarm, but the household had no trained defenders beyond himself. Better to handle this quietly if possible. He waited until the intruders passed his position, then stepped out behind them. The lady of the house doesn't welcome visitors at this hour. The men spun instantly alert. Recognitions flashed in their eyes, not of Lucius personally, but of the threat he represented. These were trained fighters. The Gladiator, one muttered. They said she'd hired protection. Leave now, Lucius offered, and tell your master this house is no longer undefended. The leader laughed softly. 3 against 1 arena man. This isn't the sands with rules and referees. True, Lucius agreed. There I would have to make it entertaining. He moved before the last word left his lips, his short sword catching the first man across the forearm, sending his weapon clattering to the tiles. The wounded man howled, clutching his sliced arm. The kitchen slave broke free in the confusion, running toward the safety of the house interior. The remaining attackers circled Lucius cautiously, now recognizing the fluid stance and balanced poise of a veteran fighter. 9 years in the arena had taught Lucius to evaluate opponents in moments. The second man moved with military precision, likely a former legionary. The leader had the predatory alertness of a career assassin. They attacked simultaneously from opposite sides. Lucius sidestepped, allowing their momentum to carry them into each other's paths. He caught the leader with a savage elbow strike to the temple, then spun to face the ex-soldier. Who sent you? Lucius demanded. Instead of answering, the man lunged. Lucius parried, their blades scraping with a shower of sparks in the darkness. They exchanged a flurry of strikes, metal ringing against metal. The household was awakening now, shouts and moving lights appearing in the villa's windows. The wounded intruder had fled into the gardens. The leader, recovering from the blow to his head, grabbed his remaining companion. We have what we need, he hissed. Fall back. As they retreated toward the garden gate, the leader turned back. Tell the widow we know she has the documents. This was just a courtesy visit. Next time we burn it all. Lucius pursued them to the property boundary, but stopped at the perimeter wall. Following them into unknown territory in darkness would be foolish. When he returned to the main house, he found Valeria in the atrium, wrapped in a cloak over her night clothes, questioning the shaken kitchen slave. They asked specifically about documents. The slave girl sobbed. They knew the master kept records. Valeria's eyes met. Lucius's across the room. You're bleeding. He glanced down, noticing for the first time a slash across his upper arm. In the heat of combat, he hadn't felt it. A scratch. Their leader had some skill. Did they say who sent them? No, but they'll report that the house now has protection. He studied her pale face. This was a probing attack. They'll return with greater numbers next time. By the following evening, news of the night raid had spread throughout the region. Valeria had no choice but to maintain appearances of normalcy, especially when Gaius Petronius, owner of the neighboring estate and her late husband's occasional ally, requested to dine with her. To refuse would signal weakness. We can't trust him, Lucius argued as Valeria prepared for the dinner. He stood in her antechamber, arms crossed, watching house slaves arrange her hair. Petronius was Quintus's friend, she countered. Friends change quickly when power shifts. Lucius replied, I've seen men who shared bread one day slit each other's throats the next. Valeria dismissed the slaves with a gesture. When they had gone, she turned to face Lucius directly. What would you have me do? Barricade myself inside these walls? Show fear? I would have you survive. His voice had dropped, revealing a hint of genuine concern beneath the professional demeanor. Something shifted in her expression. You'll be present as my freedman advisor. Keep your sword hidden, but accessible. Lucius nodded, reluctantly accepting the compromise. The dining room had been prepared according to proper Roman custom. 3 reclining couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Petronius arrived with a small retinue, including his personal wine steward, carrying sealed offrey. A gift, Petronius explained, gesturing to the wine. From my coastal vineyards, we had an exceptional year. Valeria received him graciously, though Lucius noted how her smile never quite reached her eyes. Petronius was a flawed man in his 50s, with the soft hands and rounded belly of wealth. Yet his eyes held the sharp calculation of a merchant counting coins. I was grieved to hear of the disturbance last night, Petronius said as they reclined at the table. These are troubling times when even a senator's widow isn't safe in her own home. Fortunately, I've taken measures to address such concerns, Valeria replied, nodding toward Lucius, who stood at a discreet distance. Petronius's eyebrows rose. The arena champion, an unusual choice of household staff. These are unusual times, she answered smoothly. Throughout the meal, Petronius probed delicately for information, asking about the villa's defenses, whether Valeria had considered selling portions of the estate, and if she had reviewed her late husband's business affairs. Each question seemed innocent in isolation, but formed a pattern that made Lucius increasingly alert. Petronius's wine steward moved efficiently around the table, refilling cups. When he approached Valeria's cup for the 3rd time, Lucius noticed a subtle movement, the man's hand passing over her wine rather than simply pouring. In one fluid motion, Lucius stepped forward, seizing Valeria's cup before she could drink. "Allow me to taste that for you, Domina," he said formally. "A new vintage should be properly appreciated." He raised the cup, as if examining the color, then discreetly sniffed. The faint bitter almond scent beneath the wine's bouquet confirmed his suspicion. "I find this unsuitable," he stated, setting the cup aside, his eyes locked with the steward's, who palled visibly. Petronius laughed nervously. "Your gladiator seems to fancy himself a wine connoisseur. He has many talents." Valeria replied, her voice steady despite the implications of what had just transpired, some more unexpected than others. The steward began backing toward the exit. Lucius moved to intercept him, but the man had clearly prepared his escape. He flung the remaining wine from the pitcher toward Lucius's face and bolted for the door. Temporarily blinded, Lucius wiped his eyes quickly and pursued, but the steward had a head start. By the time Lucius reached the villa's entrance, the man was mounting a horse that had been left ready in the courtyard. He galloped into the darkness before Lucius could reach him. When Lucius returned to the dining room, Petronius was making hurried apologies. "I had no knowledge of my steward's actions," he insisted, sweat beating on his forehead. "He was recommended to me only last month by a friend in Rome." "A friend with connections to Senator cases, perhaps?" Valeria asked coldly. Petronius blanched. "I wouldn't presume to know. Your steward just attempted to poison me in my own home." Valeria interrupted, rising from her couch. "You'll forgive me if I find this dinner at an end." After Petronius had been escorted from the property, Valeria collapsed into a chair in her private chambers, trembling now that she no longer needed to maintain her composure. "You saved my life," she said when Lucius joined her. "It's what you're paying me for," he replied, though his tone lacked its usual detachment. "How did you know?" The movement of his hand, a slight hesitation when he poured, and the wine. It carried the scent of crushed peach pits. Valeria took a deep breath. "They're growing bolder. Yes, night raids now poison at my table." "We need to reduce your public appearances," Lucius advised, "and no more entertaining visitors until we've identified who's behind this." "We can't hide forever." "Not forever," he agreed. "Just long enough to strengthen our position." "Our position," he'd said, "not your position." The subtle shift in language wasn't lost on either of them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for tonight, but for believing me about the threat. My own steward thought I was becoming paranoid. Marcus, he suggested I was seeing plots where there were merely opportunists." She studied his face. "You think differently." "I think Lucius said carefully, that someone very powerful wants something you have or believes you have, and they're willing to kill for it. Dawn broke over the villa with a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, the clatter of wooden practice swords, grunts of exertion, and Lucius's commanding voice drilling the household slaves in basic defensive formations. In just 3 days, he had transformed the central courtyard into a makeshift training ground. Valeria watched from the colonnade as Lucius patiently corrected a young kitchen boy's grip on a wooden sword. The gladiator moved with controlled precision, demonstrating a simple pairing motion that even untrained hands could master with practice. His manner with the slaves surprised her, firm but never cruel, demanding yet encouraging, so unlike the brutal arena persona that had made him famous. They won't become legionaries, Lucius explained later as they broke for the midday meal, but they might buy enough time to sound an alarm or escape to safety. You're teaching them to protect themselves, not just the property, Valeria observed. Something flickered across his face. In the arena, a man learns quickly that survival depends on those around him. The shield bearer, the netman, even the opponents who follow the unwritten rules of combat. I thought gladiators fought alone. We die alone, he corrected. We survive together. That evening, unable to sleep, despite the exhaustion of the day's preparations, Valeria found herself wandering the moonlit parasile garden. A soft scratching sound drew her attention to a small alcove where a single oil lamp burned low. Lucius sat on a stone bench bent over a wax tablet, stylus moving carefully across its surface. So absorbed was he in his work that he didn't notice her approach until she was nearly beside him. He started quickly covering the tablet. "Domina, you should have guards with you, even within the villa. I heard you were still awake," she said. "What are you writing?" Hesitation crossed his features. "Nothing of importance. May I see?" When he didn't immediately refuse, she added, "Please." Reluctantly, he handed her the tablet. In the lamplight, she read lines of poetry written in a surprisingly elegant hand. The olive trees bend, silver in moonlight, as they must have in centuries before Rome. Men build walls, claim land, spill blood, yet these ancient witnesses remain unmoved. What wisdom in their gnarled patience to outlast empires, to surrender to wind, to give fruit and shelter without condition. If only men could learn such generosity. Valeria looked up, finding Lucius watching her with an expression both defensive and vulnerable. "You write poetry, a foolish habit," he replied, reaching for the tablet. "From another life." She kept it beyond his grasp. "It's beautiful. The imagery of the olive trees as witnesses to human folly. It reminds me of Lucretius." Surprise registered on his face. "You've read Lucretius? My father believed daughters should be educated, despite Roman custom." She sat beside him on the bench, still holding the tablet. "He hired Greek tutors when I was young. My husband continued the practice, finding my literacy useful for his correspondence. Unusual for a Roman nobleman to value a woman's mind. Quintus was unusual in many ways." She traced the words on the tablet. "As it seems, are you? Where did a gladiator learn to compose verse?" Lucius gazed out at the moonlight garden. "Before the arena, I belonged to a scholar, an old Greek, who had fallen on hard times and could afford only one slave. He taught me to read and write first, to help with his manuscripts later, because he saw I had aptitude and poetry. His passion was philosophy, but he loved the poets. We would read Homer, Sappho, Euripides." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He said poetry was how mortal men speak to the gods, without priests as intermediaries. What happened to him? He died. His creditors sold me to the ludus. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. There I learned different lessons. Valeria handed the tablet back. "Yet you kept writing in secret. The lutus master would have beaten such softness out of me if he'd known." He set the tablet aside. "A gladiator represents manly virtues, strength, courage, contempt for death, not the melancholy reflections of a poet. Those who most understand death often think most deeply about life. She observed their eyes met in the lamplight, a moment of recognition passing between them. Then, remembering herself, Valeria stood. "We received an invitation today," she said, shifting to practical matters from Consul Tiberius's wife. "A gathering to honor the autumn equinox. To decline would raise questions. A public appearance is dangerous. More dangerous is appearing afraid," she countered. "Consul Tiberius was my husband's patron. His protection still carries weight." Lucius frowned. "Then I will accompany you as your freedman advisor. People will talk." "People always talk," he replied. "Better gossip than funeral arrangements." As she turned to leave, Valeria hesitated. "Would you share your writings with me again? Perhaps tomorrow evening?" For a moment, she glimpsed uncertainty in his usually composed features. Then he nodded once. "If it pleases you, Domina, Valeria," she corrected gently when we're alone. "At least Domina feels wrong between us now." She left him there in the garden alcove, his expression unreadable in the flickering lamplight. As she walked back to her chambers, Valeria realized she was clutching the memory of his words like a precious stone, turning them over in her mind. To give fruit and shelter without condition. If only men could learn such generosity. How strange that a man trained to kill could harbor such tender insights. The formal invitation lay on Valeria's dressing table, its embossed seal and elegant script belying the potential dangers of attending Consul Tiberius's gathering. As Livia arranged her hair with pear-lipped pins, Valeria studied her reflection, ensuring her expression revealed nothing of her apprehension. "The black stula?" Livia asked, hands hovering over the mourning garment Valeria had worn since Quintus's death. "No," Valeria decided. "The deep blue. I remain in mourning. But this is a celebration. A compromise is appropriate." Lucius waited in the atrium, dressed in the formal tunic of a household freedman. The fine woolen garment, hastily acquired from the local market, transformed him from warrior to respectable advisor, though nothing could disguise the muscled physique built through years of combat or the watchful alertness in his posture. "You look," he began, when Valeria appeared, then stopped himself. "Presentable," she suggested with a faint smile. "Formidable," he corrected. Like a general before battle, she appreciated his understanding. This was indeed a battle fought with words and gestures rather than swords. They traveled in Valeria's curtained litter, accompanied by 4 household slaves Lucius had trained personally. The journey to Consul Tiberius's estate took them through the busy coastal town, where people stopped to stare at the widow Secundus, making her first public appearance since her husband's funeral. "Remember," Valeria murmured as they approached the consul's villa. "You are Lucius Aurelius, a freedman with military experience who advises me on security matters, nothing more. And if someone recognizes the butcher of Capua, most patricians consider the arena beneath their notice. They may have heard of your victories, but few would recognize your face without the helmet." The consul's home blazed with torchlight, the sounds of laughter and music spilling into the evening air. Slaves took their cloaks as a steward announced them to the gaff ring, Lady Valeria Secundis and her companion. The subtle omission of Lucius's name was deliberate, a reminder that regardless of his free status, he remained invisible to high society. Consul Tiberius himself came to greet them, a tall man with the weathered face of one who had earned his position through military service before entering politics. "Valeria, my dear," he said, taking her hands, "I'm delighted you accepted our invitation. Quintus would be pleased to see you maintaining connections." "Consul Tiberius," she replied formally. "Your invitation was most welcome." His sharp eyes flicked to Lucius. "And this is Lucius Aurelius," she said. "A freeman who advises me on household security." Understanding dawned in the consul's expression. "Ah, yes, I heard about the unfortunate incidents at your estate. A prudent precaution. As the evening progressed, Valeria navigated the treacherous waters of Roman social politics with practiced grace. She accepted condolences, deflected uncomfortable questions about her future plans, and maintained the delicate balance between proper widowhood and necessary social engagement. Lucius remained close but unobtrusive, his presence drawing curious glances and whispered comment. Valeria caught fragments of conversation as she moved through the crowded atrium. Hired a gladiator as protection, living alone with a man of that class. Wonder what else he guards besides her property. She ignored the insinuations, though she noticed Lucius's jaw tightening at particularly audible remarks. Senator Cases arrived late, his entrance causing a subtle shift in the room's energy. He made his way directly to Valeria, offering condolences that sounded rehearsed. "I understand you've had some troubles with local bandits," he said, eyes sliding to Lucius, "though it seems you've found unconventional solutions. The widow Secundus has taken appropriate measures to secure her property." Lucius replied before Valeria could answer, his tone respectful but firm. Case's eyebrows rose at being addressed directly by someone he considered a servant. "Indeed, and what qualifies a man of your background to determine what's appropriate for a senator's widow?" "Experience with men who wish others harm," Lucius answered evenly. The tension between them was palpable. Valeria placed a hand lightly on Lucius's arm, both a restraint and, she realized with surprise, a gesture of support. "If you'll excuse us, Senator," she said smoothly, "Consul Tiberius is signaling for us to join him." As they moved away, Lucius murmured, "He's involved. I'm certain of it." "Based on what evidence?" "The way he watched you, not with desire or concern, but assessment, like a buyer inspecting merchandise with hidden flaws." Later, as they prepared to depart, Valeria overheard a conversation not meant for her ears. Two senators partially concealed behind a column speaking in low voices. Secundus knew too much about the grain shipments. "Wife must have the documents. Cassius says she'll be pressured to sell before winter. Unfortunate if she suffered her husband's fate." She withdrew silently, finding Lucius and signaling it was time to leave. They made their farewells quickly, citing the late hour and the journey home. In the litter, curtains drawn against the night, Valeria finally allowed her composed mask to slip. "They spoke of Quintus knowing about grain shipments, and implied I might suffer his fate." Lucius's expression hardened. "Who were?" "Senator Antonius and Tribune Flavius. They didn't see me. This confirms the raids aren't random." "Your husband had information." A sudden jolt interrupted him as the litter lurched violently. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the unmistakable clash of weapons. "Ambush," Lucius said grimly, drawing his concealed sword. "Stay inside," before Valeria could protest. He had slipped through the curtains into the chaos beyond. The journey home became a blur of shouting and steel. From inside the litter, Valeria heard Lucius barking commands to their escorts, followed by the sounds of combat, grunts of exertion, cries of pain, and the distinctive ring of blades meeting. Despite his warnings, she pushed aside the curtains enough to witness the scene. Moonlight gleamed on drawn weapons as 6 masked attackers engaged their small party. Lucius fought with a controlled ferocity she had not yet seen. Gone was the restraint he had shown during the night raid at the villa. This was the arena champion in his element, his movements precise and lethal. 2 attackers already lay motionless on the ground. As she watched, Lucius disarmed a third with a move so swift it seemed impossible, following with a killing thrust to the throat. Their slave escorts, though inexperienced, were applying his training, fighting defensively, working together to protect the litter. The remaining attackers, seeing their advantage lost, melted into the darkness with a shouted threat. "Cases will have what belongs to him." When they arrived back at the villa, Rufus, the vineyard overseer, waited in the courtyard with concern etched across his weathered face. "Marcus has prepared hot water and bandages," he said, eyeing the blood on Lucius's sleeve. "See to the others first." Lucius directed, helping Valeria from the litter. The lady's safety is the priority. In the privacy of the study, Valeria's composure finally broke. Her hands trembled as she poured wine for them both. They mentioned Cassius directly. He doesn't even bother hiding his involvement anymore. Because he believes he's untouchable, Lucius said, wincing slightly, as he examined a shallow cut on his arm. Valeria set down her cup and moved to help him. "Let me," taking a clean cloth. She dabbed at the wound with unexpected gentleness. Lucius remained still, though she noticed his breathing change as her fingers brushed his skin. "You fought differently tonight," she observed. "Not like at the villa. Those were hired thugs. Tonight's attackers were trained, former legionaries, by their technique." He met her eyes. They weren't sent just to frighten you. The implication hung heavy between them. After a moment, Valeria moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the room and withdrew a rolled parchment. "I think it's time you saw this," she said, spreading a detailed map across the desk. Small marks and notations covered the coastline and surrounding territories. Quintus created this to track political alliances and enemies in the region. The red markings indicate properties owned by his supporters. Blue for opposition. Lucius studied it carefully. "Our location is vulnerable, surrounded by blue." "Yes, but notice the trade routes." She traced lines representing roads and sea passages. "All grain shipments from the southern provinces pass either by our port or through land controlled by Quintus's allies." And instinct dawned in Lucius's expression. "A stranglehold on the grain supply." "Precisely. Whoever controls these routes can influence prices throughout Rome itself." Quintus and his faction prevented price gouging by maintaining fair distribution. She pointed to notations along the routes. These numbers record instances where Cassius and his allies attempted to divert shipments or create artificial shortages. "Evidence of corruption," Lucius said, appreciating the significance. "Enough to damage Cassius in the Senate or secure Quintus's position against him." Valeria's voice grew quiet. "I believe that's why my husband was killed and why they want whatever records he kept." Lucius straightened his tactical mind, assessing this new information. "We need reinforcements. I have former arena brothers who would come if called. Men I trust with my life. Can they be here quickly? Within 2 days I'll send messages at first light." He traced a protective perimeter around the villa on the map. "Until then, we'll strengthen what defenses we have." As they continued planning late into the night, Marcus arrived with a platter of food and fresh wine. The steward's face betrayed his concern. "The household is unsettled by tonight's events. Domina, there are whispers that we face powers beyond our ability to resist." Valeria exchanged glances with Lucius. Before responding, "Tell them that the Lady Secundis stands her ground. Any who wish to leave may do so with references and a month's wages. Those who stay will be rewarded for their loyalty when this is over." After Marcus departed, Lucius spoke quietly. "You should consider leaving your coastal properties in Nepal would be safer, and abandon what my husband died protecting." She shook her head firmly. "I will not run from Cassius and his conspirators." "Then we prepare for siege." Lucius rolled up the map carefully. "Tomorrow we begin converting this villa into a fortress." As they worked through the night, a different kind of tension grew between them. Not the weariness of their early days, but something more complex. Each brush of hands over documents, each shared glance of understanding built a connection neither had anticipated. When dawn finally broke, they had formulated a strategy to defend the estate and leverage Quintus's information against their enemies. They had also, without speaking of it directly, crossed an invisible boundary. Valeria was no longer simply his employer, nor Lucius merely her protector. They parted at the atrium, both needing rest before the preparations began. "Lucius," Valeria said as he turned to leave, "what you did tonight, thank you, isn't adequate." He paused, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. "I swore to protect you. Is that all this is? An oath fulfilled?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. Finally, Lucius answered with careful honesty. "No," he said simply. "Not anymore." He left her. Men, both of them aware that something fundamental had shifted, even as the greater dangers around them continued to gather like storm clouds on the horizon. 3 days passed in a flurry of preparations. True to his word, Lucius, his former arena companions, arrived 5 battle-hardened men who regard him with a mixture of respect and camaraderie, rarely seen outside military ranks. They integrated seamlessly into the household defense training, the more capable slaves and establishing regular patrols. The evening brought a rare moment of calm. Valeria sat in the small garden adjacent to her private quarters, a bronze bracelet turning idly in her hands. The ancient piece had belonged to her mother. Simple copper overlaid with delicate silver wirework, fashioned in the style of merchant families, rather than patrician excess. "A family heirloom?" Lucius asked, appearing at the garden entrance. He had taken to checking on her personally each evening, a routine that had evolved from duty into something they both quietly anticipated. "My mother's," Valeria confirmed, gesturing for him to join her on the stone bench. "One of the few possessions I brought from my father's house when I married." Lucius sat, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless felt more intimate than their earlier interactions. "Not jewels befitting a senator's wife." Quintus offered to replace it with gold and gems. "I refused." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He thought me sentimental. Were you, perhaps?" She ran her thumb over the worn medal. "Or perhaps I needed to remember who I was before becoming Valeria Secundus, when I was simply Valeria Marcella, daughter of a grain merchant from Ostia." Lucius studied her with newfound curiosity. "You were fortunate in your marriage. It wasn't love, if that's what you're asking." She replied with characteristic directness. "It was an arrangement beneficial to both families. But Quintus was kind. He respected my mind, included me in his work. Many women endure far worse. And he protected you. We protected each other in different ways." She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. "What of your family? You've spoken of Hispania, but little else." A shadow crossed his features. "They're likely dead. Our village resisted Roman expansion. Those not killed in the fighting were sold into slavery. You don't know for certain." 9 years is a long time," he said quietly, "and Rome keeps no records of those it conquers, only those it elevates." Valeria heard the bitterness beneath his controlled tone. "Yet you learned our language, our literature. When options are slavery or death, one adapts." He looked out toward the darkening vineyard slopes. "Though sometimes I still dream in my mother tongue." "What was your name, before Rome renamed you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment he was silent, as though weighing whether to share something long buried. "The rat," he finally said after a Lucatanian rebel. "My father admired." "The rat," she repeated softly, the foreign syllables awkward on her tongue. A shout from the direction of the olive groves interrupted them. One of the patrol signals Lucas had established. Both were immediately alert, the moment of connection broken. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his sword as he moved swiftly toward the commotion. Valeria waited only until he was out of sight before following. She had learned enough from watching the training sessions to move quietly through the familiar grounds of her estate. At the edge of the grove, she found Lucas and 2 of his men surrounding a cloaked figure. As she approached, they forced the intruder to his knees and removed his hood. Domina, one of the gladiators, acknowledged her presence with obvious disapproval at her disobedience. The captured man was young, barely 20, with the cloth-cropped hair of a household slave and terror in his eyes. He was searching through the storage buildings near the main house, Lucas explained. Carrying this, he held up a small knife. "I wasn't stealing," the young man protested. "I was sent to find something." "Please, they have my sister." "Who sent you?" Lucas demanded. "Senator Case's steward." Tears streaked the boy's face. "I serve in his kitchen," he said. "If I found papers about grain shipments, my sister would be released. Otherwise," he couldn't finish. Valeria and Lucas exchanged glances. "What's your name?" she asked. "Titus Domina." "And how did you enter the estate?" The boy hesitated. "Through the servants' passage by the south wall. I was told it wouldn't be guarded." Lucas's expression hardened. Who told you that? Marcus, your steward. He sometimes visits our household, speaks with our master. The revelation hung in the air between them. Marcus, who had served the Secundus family for 30 years, who had practically raised Valeria's husband from boyhood. Take him to the storeroom. Lucasus instructed his men, guard him, but treat him well. He may be telling the truth. When they were alone, Valeria's composed exterior finally cracked. Marcus, I trusted him with everything. Men have different prices, Lucas said grimly. Some are bought with gold, others with threats. What do? We use this. Lucas's tactical mind was already working. We don't confront Marcus yet. Feed him false information. Let him believe we've moved the documents to your coastal property, while keeping the real ones here. Exactly. And we set our own trap for whoever comes seeking them as they walked back toward the villa. Valeria was acutely aware of how their shoulders nearly touched, how naturally they had begun moving as a unit rather than as separate individuals. The discovery of Marcus's betrayal should have devastated her. Yet having Lucius at her side somehow made the blow bearable. We should discuss this in the study, she said, as they approached the main house. Yes, he agreed, though neither moved with particular urgency. For a moment longer, they lingered in the gathering darkness, reluctant to break the strange intimacy that danger had forged between them. Valeria had spent her entire marriage as the senator's wife, 15 years dwelling in these rooms, yet she had never noticed the slight unevenness in the library wall paneling. Now, as she ran her fingers along the smooth wood, she felt what generations of cleaning slaves had missed. A nearly invisible seam behind the shelf containing her husband's collection of historical chronicles. Quintus, you clever man, she whispered, pressing the section of wall, as Lucius had demonstrated when they examined other hidden compartments throughout the villa. The panel slid silently inward, revealing a shallow recess containing a leather-bound ledger. The book was unassuming, its cover unmarked, save for a small stamp of the Secundus family seal. Valeria handled it reverently, aware she was touching what had likely cost her husband his life. She carried the ledger to the study where Lucius waited with Marcus. The steward had been told they were reviewing estate accounts, a routine task that would not arouse suspicion. His eyes widened slightly at the book in Valeria's hands. The quarterly grain records as requested, she said smoothly, maintaining the pretense for Marcus's benefit. I found them among my husband's personal effects. Marcus nodded. The perfect image of a beautiful steward, though Valeria now noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. The too careful way he avoided looking directly at the ledger. Shall I summon the vineyard overseer to discuss autumn storage? He asked. Not necessary, Lucius interjected. Lady Valeria and I will review these first. Perhaps you could inspect the repaired section of the southern wall. The workman completed it this morning. It was a transparent dismissal, but one Marcus could not refuse without revealing his interest in the ledger. After he departed, they waited several minutes to ensure he was truly gone. He'll report this to Cases, Lucius said, securing the study door. Good. Let him believe we found only routine records. Valeria opened the ledger, her breath catching as she recognized her husband's meticulous handwriting. The pages contained far more than simple accounting. Quintus had documented years of corruption in the grain trade, shipments diverted, supply artificially restricted, prices manipulated. Each entry named those involved, recorded dates, amounts, and most crucially, included references to supporting evidence, letters, witnesses, copied records. This is extraordinary, Valeria murmured, turning pages with increasing urgency. He tracked every transaction, every conspiracy to inflate prices during shortages. Lucius studied the entries over her shoulder, his expression darkening. These arrangements would have starved thousands. During the summer drought 2 years ago, prices quadrupled while shipments sat in warehouses, and Cases appears throughout along with Flavius and 3 other senators. Valeria pointed to recurring names. Together, they control enough votes to block any investigation. Unless confronted with irrefutable evidence, Lucius tapped a specific entry. This mentions letters between cases and the port authority at Ostia, documenting bribes to delay shipments. Quintus wrote that he secured copies. She frowned, scanning the text, hidden with an old friend who owes no allegiance to the current order, a non-Roman, perhaps a foreign merchant. Valeria closed the ledger, her mind racing. Alexandras, a Greek trader who maintained friendship with my father after his death. He has connections throughout the Mediterranean but holds no Roman citizenship. He would be beyond the reach of senatorial pressure. Can we trust him with this? Yes, he despises the corruption in Rome's grain trade. His ships have been delayed by the very schemes documented here. Their eyes met across the desk, understanding passing between them. I should go alone, Valeria said. A widow visiting a family friend will draw less attention than if you accompany me. Out of the question, Lucius replied immediately. After 2 assassination attempts, a heavily guarded widow would be equally suspicious. The entire point is to appear unremarkable. Lucius paced the room, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but recognizing its logic. 2 guards disguised as household slaves, non-negotiable, agreed. She conceded, we'll leave at dawn, before Marcus rises to report this development that evening. As they finalized preparations, a messenger arrived from the port town bearing news that confirmed their suspicions. Senator Cases had called an emergency meeting of his faction. Ships belonging to his allies were being loaded with unusual haste, their consolidating power. Lucius observed as they shared a simple meal in Valeria's private dining room, preparing for whatever comes after they obtain or destroy Quintus's evidence, or they're preparing to flee if exposed. Valeria countered, these men value self-preservation above all. The conversation drifted from strategy to more personal waters as the night deepened. The ledger lay between them, a physical reminder of greater forces surrounding their increasingly intertwined fates. What will you do when this is resolved? Lucius asked suddenly. If we succeed, the question caught Valeria off guard. She had been so focused on survival that the future remained an abstraction. Continue managing the estate, I suppose. What of you? Still planning to buy land in the north? That was my intention. His eyes held hers across the table. Now I find myself less certain. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge what had been building since that first meeting in her husband's study. Instead, they spoke of practical matters, the journey to find Alexandros, signals to be used if they were followed, contingency plans. Yet beneath the tactical discussion flowed an undercurrent of something deeper, when their hands accidentally touched while examining a map. Neither withdrew immediately. When Lucius spoke of protecting her, his voice carried a warmth that transcended duty. As midnight approached, Valeria finally addressed what both had been circling. Whatever happens tomorrow with Alexandros, with the evidence, I want you to know that She paused, searching for words appropriate to their impossible situation. I know, Lucius said quietly, saving her from the confession hovering on her lips. So do I. They parted soon after, both aware that dawn would bring new dangers. Yet something had shifted, a boundary crossed without words, a future glimpse despite all that stood against it. Their meeting with Alexandros had confirmed what they suspected. The Greek merchant held sealed documents, entrusted to him by Quintus, to be released only if something happened to the senator, with Alexandros now alerted to watch for further development. They had returned to the villa to prepare their next move. Again, Lucius instructed, circling Valeria in the small courtyard they had designated for private training. Dawn had barely broken, the early morning light casting long shadows across the stone tiles. Your attacker won't give you second chances. Valeria adjusted her grip on the wooden practice sword, smaller and lighter than Lucius's gladiator weapons, but still awkward in her unaccustomed hands. Sweat dampened her simple tunic, her hair pulled back in a practical braid rather than the elaborate styles expected of her station. "I'm a merchant's daughter, not a warrior," she protested, though she repositioned her feet as he had taught her. "And I was a farmer's son before becoming a gladiator," he countered. "Circumstances change us." She lunged again, aiming for his midsection as instructed. Lucius easily deflected the strike, but nodded with approval. "Better. You're learning to commit to the movement. What good is this against trained soldiers?" she asked, breathing hard. "This isn't about winning battles." He moved behind her, adjusting her stance with light touches to her shoulders and hips that sent unexpected warmth through her despite the exertion. "It's about surviving long enough for help to reach you." They continued the lesson, Lucius patiently demonstrating simple defensive moves designed not for victory, but for precious moments of survival. As they worked, Valeria found herself increasingly aware of him, not just as her protector, or even as a man she was coming to care for, but as a teacher revealing parts of himself through his instruction. "You were trained by someone who valued life," she observed during a brief rest. "These movements are about preservation, not spectacle." Something like surprise flickered across his face. "Yes, my first combat trainer in the Lutus, an older gladiator who had somehow survived 15 years in the arena. He taught us to fight smart, not just bravely." Unlike what the crowds expected from the butcher of Capua, his expression darkened at the arena name. That persona was created by the Lutus master. The crowds wanted blood and drama. I gave them enough to survive while keeping the true extent of my skills hidden. "You were playing a role, as we all do." His eyes met hers. The beautiful senator's wife, the savage gladiator, masks that become difficult to remove. The practice sword hung forgotten in her hand as understanding passed between them. They had both been shaped by roles not entirely of their choosing, had both learned to navigate worlds where appearances mattered more than truth. The moment was broken by Livia's arrival, her expression tense. "Domina, a messenger has arrived. Senator Cases requests the honor of dining here tonight. He wishes to discuss matters of mutual benefit regarding the estate." Valeria and Lucius exchanged glances. "He's making his move," Lucius said after Livia had been dismissed. Sooner than expected, Valeria returned the practice sword to him, their fingers brushing. "We need to accelerate our plans." Throughout the day, the villa hummed with preparations. On the surface, they appeared to be readying for an honored guest. The kitchens busy with elaborate dishes, the dining room arranged to Roman standards. Beneath this conventional activity, Lucius and his men established a different kind of preparation. Escape routes identified, weapons concealed at strategic points, signals arranged. "Marcus has been monitoring everything," Lucius reported as they met in the study. "He sent 3 messages to town today. Let him believe we're panicking." Valeria replied, "I've instructed the slaves to mention that valuable documents are being moved to a secure location tomorrow, and the actual ledger." She padded the folds of her stola, hidden in plain sight. "I've had Livia sew a concealed pocket." Lucius nodded approvingly. "Cases will expect to find a vulnerable widow, not a prepared opponent. The surprise may give us an advantage." As evening approached, Valeria retreated to her chambers to dress appropriately for their dangerous guest. Livia helped her into a formal stola of deep blue, arranging her hair in the restrained style of a woman still observing mourning customs while resuming public duties. When she emerged, she found Lucius waiting in the corridor, now dressed as a proper freedman advisor, rather than a guard. The transformation was striking in formal attire with his warrior's alertness carefully modulated. He could almost pass for a man born to higher station. "You look," he began, then stopped himself. "Prepared for battle," she suggested, echoing his earlier assessment. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Formidable," he confirmed. As they walked toward the atrium to await their guest, Lucius spoke quietly. "If anything goes wrong, remember what we practiced. Create distance, use available objects as barriers, aim for vulnerable points. You'll be there." she said with more confidence than she felt. Yes, his voice dropped lower, meant for her alone, always. The word hung between them, weighted with implications neither could fully express. Always a promise extending beyond their current arrangement, beyond the immediate danger, a future neither had dared imagine, until now. The villa steward's voice interrupted this unspoken exchange. Senator Casey and his retinue are approaching the gates. Domina Valeria straightened, assuming the poised mask of the senator's widow, receiving an important guest. Beside her, Lucius adopted the deferential posture expected of a household freedman. Both performances concealed the truth of what had grown between them, and the deadly game they were about to play with one of Rome's most dangerous men. Senator Casey arrived with calculated ostentation, a litter carried by 8 matched slaves, accompanied by 4 armed guards and 2 personal attendants. His entrance to the villa was that of a man already considering the property his own, his appraising gaze lingering on valuable art pieces and architectural features. Lady Valeria, he greeted her with the practiced charm of a career politician. Your hospitality honors me during these difficult times. Senator Casey, she replied with equal formality. My home welcomes you. She performed the expected rituals of welcome flawlessly, offering water for hand-washing, ensuring proper introduction. Lucius stood at a respectful distance, the perfect image of a household freedman. Eyes lowered, posture deferential. Only Valeria could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful positioning that kept him within striking distance of the senator. As they moved toward the triclinium for dinner, Valeria noticed Marcus hovering unusually close, his attention fixed on the senator rather than the household's needs. A silent exchange of glances with Lucius confirmed he had observed the same. The dining couches had been arranged traditionally, Valeria as hostess on one side, Casey as honored guest on another. Lucius stood against the wall with other household staff, present but invisible to patrician eyes. Your late husband's estate continues to thrive under your management, Casey observed as the first course was served. Impressive for a woman alone. Quintus ensured I understood all aspects of our holdings, she replied smoothly. He believed in preparation. A slight smile touched Casey's lips. Indeed, Quintus Secundus was known for his thoroughness in recording important matters. The deliberate emphasis sent a chill through Valeria, though she maintained her composed expression. My husband valued accuracy in all things, a commendable trait, Casey agreed. Though sometimes dangerous when certain accuracies might better remain unrecorded. The conversation continued in this vein, seemingly polite observations laden with veiled threats. As the main course was served, Casey finally abandoned pretense. I'll speak plainly, Lady Valeria. Your position is precarious. A widow without children or powerful family connections cannot maintain an estate of this significance indefinitely. I've managed well enough these past months, with unusual assistance. His gaze flicked toward Lucius. Your choice of household advisor has raised eyebrows in Rome. My domestic arrangements are hardly Senate business. They become Senate business when they involve matters of state security. Casey set down his wine cup. Perhaps we should speak more privately. Valeria nodded to the household slaves who withdrew as instructed. Only Lucius remained, moving to stand behind her couch. Your freedman may leave us as well, Casey suggested. Lucius Aurelius advises me on all matters of importance, Valeria countered. He stays. Something shifted in Casey's expression, a calculating reassessment. Very well, I'll be direct. I know Quintus kept detailed records of certain senatorial matters, particularly regarding grain distribution. As his widow, you've likely discovered these documents. My husband left extensive records of his business affairs. She acknowledged carefully. Those records contain inaccuracies that could be misinterpreted by those unfamiliar with the complexities of governance. Misinterpreted. Valeria raised an eyebrow. Or accurately interpreted as evidence of corruption. The directness of her response clearly surprised him. His facade of civility thinned. I'm prepared to offer a generous sum for this property, significantly above its market value. You could retire comfortably to a smaller estate, perhaps in the countryside, away from political entanglements, and the documents would naturally be included in the sale of my friend's personal effects. His smile didn't reach his eyes out of respect for his memory. Before Valeria could respond, the door to the triclinium opened. Marcus entered, carrying a small chest. "The items you requested, Senator," he said, avoiding Valeria's gaze. The betrayal, though expected, still struck like a physical blow. Marcus, who had served her family for decades, who had known her since her marriage, was openly demonstrating his true allegiance. "What is this, Marcus?" she demanded. The steward finally met her eyes, his expression a mixture of defiance and something like regret. "Financial security domina." Senator Cases recognizes loyalty in a way the Secundus family never did. After 30 years of service, 30 years of being treated as furniture, he replied bitterly, "Always present, never acknowledged." Cases interrupted their exchange. "Your steward has been most helpful in keeping me informed about the villa's activities. He was particularly interested in my offer to make him estate manager. After the sale is complete." Valeria's composure nearly broke at this final betrayal. She had trusted Marcus with everything: household matters, private correspondence, access to all areas of the estate. "The chest, Marcus," Cases prompted. The steward placed it on the table and stepped back. "I found these hidden in the library wall as you suggested, Senator. Correspondence between the domino and certain merchants regarding document transfers." Lucius moved imperceptibly closer to Valeria's couch, his hand drifting toward the concealed weapon beneath his tunic. The tension in the room thickened as Cases examined the letters, the false evidence they had deliberately left for Marcus to find. "Interesting," Cases murmured. "These suggest you've moved the most incriminating documents to your coastal property." His eyes lifted to Valeria's. "Is that true?" "Would I admit it if it were?" she countered. Casey's attention shifted to Lucius, his expression darkening. "Your gladiator appears unusually invested in this conversation for a mere freedman, perhaps because he has his own history with political insurrection." The unexpected statement hung in the air like a blade. Valeria felt rather than saw Lucius stiffened beside her. "I wonder," Cases continued, "if the Lady Secundus knows she harbors not just a former gladiator, but a rebel commander from the Lucatanian uprising, a man once known as Virat the Defiant, before his capture and convenient death in the arena." Silence filled the triclinium, thick as winter fog. Valeria didn't turn to look at Lucius, keeping her eyes fixed on Cases, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her surprise. The senator watched them both, with the calculating patience of a man accustomed to setting traps and waiting for them to spring. "Your informants are creative," Valeria finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "A rebel commander. How theatrical. Not informants," Caches corrected. "Official military records. Records your husband accessed shortly before his death." He reached into his toga and withdrew a small bronze disc, a military seal with distinctive markings. "This was recovered from the body of a Lucatanian rebel leader 7 years ago. Strange how it recently appeared among items confiscated from a lotus in Capua." Valeria felt Lucius move slightly behind her. The tension radiating from him was palpable. "You've clearly gone to considerable lengths to construct this fiction," she replied. "I wonder why a senator concerns himself with a freedman's history. Because this particular freedman has connections to the very documents your husband was collecting." Cash's smile was cold. "The Lucatanian rebellion was financed in part by certain grain merchants. Merchants who later testified against senators involved in supply manipulation. The same senators named in Quintus records. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. Not just corruption in grain distribution, but a systematic suppression of regional rebellions through manufactured food shortages. Political control maintained through starvation." "Lady Valeria," Cases continued, his tone almost sympathetic, "you've been deceived. This man isn't merely your protector. He likely orchestrated your husband's death to access those records. The gladiator seeking revenge on Rome." "Enough," Lucius said quietly. Breaking his silence, he stepped forward, no longer maintaining the pretense of the differential freedman. Your manipulations dishonor this house. Casey's guards moved toward the doorway, hands on weapons. Marcus backed away, suddenly aware he was caught between dangerous forces. Seek the truth. Then, Casey's challenged, tell your mistress who you really are. Lucius looked at Valeria, his expression unreadable. May we speak privately? Whatever you say to her, you can say before me, Casey's interjected. I'm merely concerned for the widow's safety. Leave us, Valeria commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her position. You too, Marcus. Lady Valeria, Casey's began. This is still my house, Senator. I will hear what my advisor has to say, then make my own judgment. Wait in the atrium. Something in her tone, perhaps the steel beneath the courtesy, made Casey's reconsider his objection. He nodded to his guards and rose from the dining couch. As he wish, but remember, he is trained to kill. I advise caution. When they were alone, Valeria finally turned to face Lucius. Is it true? He held her gaze steadily. Parts of it. Which parts? I was more than a simple soldier. He reached for the military seal Casey's had left on the table. This was mine. I commanded a unit of fighters during the Lusitanian resistance. You led a rebellion against Rome. I defended my homeland against invasion. He corrected. As any man would. Valeria moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. Outside, the Mediterranean gleamed in moonlight, indifferent to human conflicts. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have hired a known rebel to protect you? A man Rome officially executed years ago. His voice held no defensiveness, only a weary acceptance. I told you I was captured in Hispania. I didn't specify that I was brought to Rome in chains to be executed publicly. Yet you survived. The Lutus master recognized my fighting skills. He offered the military tribunal an alternative. Execute me quickly or let me die slowly in the arena. For public entertainment. They chose spectacle over justice. A bitter smile crossed his face. I disappointed them by surviving. For 9 years Valeria turned back to him, and then the wooden sword, freedom of sorts. I kept my head down, saved my coins, planned to disappear to the northern frontier until I offered you employment. Lucius nodded. At first it was simply the money. Then he didn't finish the thought. Valeria studied him, searching for deception and finding none. And my husband's documents. Caches suggested you had interest in them. I knew nothing of them until I came here, he answered firmly. But once I understood what they contained, yes, they matter to me. They provide evidence of how Rome controls conquered regions through food supply. The same tactics they used against my people. So, this has been about revenge. The possibility hurt more than she expected. It was, he admitted. When I first learned what the documents contained, I thought they might serve my old cause. And now Lucius crossed the distance. After so many years, I'm not sure what remains of my homeland. You never considered staying in Italia? His eyes met hers briefly. Until recently, no. The implication warmed her, despite the morning chill. Before she could respond, Rufus signaled from the driver's seat, a subtle gesture indicating they were being followed. Lucius casually turned in his saddle, appearing to adjust his cloak while assessing the road behind them. 2 riders keeping their distance, Cache's men, likely scouts, ensuring we're actually coming to the gathering. His posture remained relaxed, giving no indication he'd noticed anything amiss. We expected this. As they approached a forested section of road, Lucius signaled to Demetrius, who slipped away into the trees, a precaution they had planned, positioning a man ahead to watch for ambush. The coastal road narrowed as it wounded through olive groves and small vineyards. To their right, the land dropped away sharply to rocky beaches and the endless blue of the Mediterranean. To their left, wooded hills provided perfect cover for anyone wishing to observe or attack travelers. We're entering Flavius's territory, Valeria noted as they passed a boundary marker. His villa is just beyond that promontory. And our followers have disappeared, Lucius added with a frown. Not a good sign. They crested a hill, bringing the tribune's estate into view. An impressive villa perched on a cliff overlooking the sea, its white columns gleaming in the midday sun. Several carriages were already visible in the approach, suggesting other guests had arrived. Demetrius emerged from the trees ahead, signaling all clear. As they passed, he murmured to Lucius, 6 armed men at the entrance, more inside by the looks of the grounds. Expected for a gathering of wealthy landowners, Valeria observed, though her pulse quickened. Perhaps Lucius conceded, but I recognized 2 of them, former legionaries who've worked as hired swords since their service, not typical household guards. They exchanged a final glance as the carriage approached the villa entrance. In that brief moment, everything that remained unsaid between them seemed to crystallize into silent understanding. "Whatever happens," Valeria said softly, "I don't regret bringing you into my household." Lucius's expression softened momentarily, "Nor I accepting the position." Then, as they came within earshot of the waiting attendants, his face resumed its professional mask. "We proceed as planned, Domina." She nodded, assuming the poised demeanor expected of her station. As Tribune Flavius's steward approached to welcome them, Valeria felt the weight of her father's ring against her finger, a small but potent reminder that she had been born to face challenges with clear-eyed pragmatism, not retreat from them in fear. The interior of Tribune Flavius's villa displayed the ostentatious wealth of a man eager to announce his importance. Freshly painted murals depicted scenes of his supposed military triumphs, while imported marble statues lined the atrium. Servants in matching tunics guided guests through the sprawling complex toward a large parasol garden where the gathering was being held. Valeria catalogued each detail with heightened awareness. The positioning of guards, too many for a social event, the absence of women among the guests, unusual for a legitimate gathering, the subtle blocking of certain corridors by strategically placed servants. "No sign of Consul Tiberius," she murmured to Lucius as they moved through the crowded atrium. "Nor of Flavia Nepos and her husband, because they were never invited," he replied quietly. "Notice how the guests cluster all known associates of Cases or Flavius." Tribune Flavius himself approached, a corpulent man whose military title had been purchased rather than earned. "Lady Sarkandis, what an unexpected pleasure." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We weren't certain you would accept our invitation." "I never refuse an opportunity to discuss matters affecting coastal landowners," Valeria replied smoothly. "Though I'm disappointed Consul Tiberius couldn't attend. State business called him to Rome unexpectedly." Flavius waved dismissively, "But Senator Cases is eager to continue your discussion from the other evening." "I'm sure he is." They were escorted to the garden where perhaps 20 men circulated in small groups. Valeria recognized most minor senators, wealthy merchants, local officials, all connected to the grain trade in some capacity, all with reason to fear exposure of the corruption her husband had documented. Cases sat at the far end of the garden in conversation with 2 men. Valeria didn't recognize. His expression when he spotted her was one of satisfied anticipation, a predator confident in his trap. "We should separate," Lucius suggested. "I'll learn what I can from the household staff while you engage the primary guests." She nodded slightly. "Be careful. And you." His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary before he withdrew to a position along the wall where other attendants waited. For the next hour, Valeria circulated among the guests, projecting the perfect image of a widow navigating society with appropriate dignity. She accepted wine but didn't drink, laughed at political jokes while memorizing names and connections, and carefully steered conversations toward matters of trade and grain distribution. "The southern route has become quite profitable," remarked a merchant named Vitellius, especially with the new arrangements. "My late husband mentioned those arrangements," Valeria replied, watching his reaction carefully. Though he worried about sustainability, the man's expression flickered with momentary alarm before smoothing into practiced affiliate. Senator Secundis was always concerned with the common welfare, admirable, if somewhat impractical in these times. Similar conversations with other guests revealed a network of corruption more extensive than even Quintus's records had documented. Not just price manipulation, but coordinated suppression of regional rebellions through controlled starvation, bribery of port officials, and falsification of shipping records. Across the garden, she occasionally caught glimpses of Lucius, moving among the servants, exchanging brief words with a guard he seemed to recognize, gradually working his way toward a corridor leading deeper into the villa. As the afternoon advanced, Valeria noted subtle shifts in the gathering's energy. Guards repositioned themselves near exits. Servants stopped circulating with wine and food. Conversations quieted as Cases rose from his seat and approached the center of the garden. "Friends," he addressed the assembled guests, "we've enjoyed Tribune Flavius's hospitality long enough. Perhaps it's time to address the true purpose of our gathering." All eyes turned to Valeria, the pretense of a legitimate social event evaporating like morning mist under harsh sun. "Lady Secundis," Cases continued, "has been holding certain documents belonging to her late husband, documents that contain dangerous misrepresentations of our business practices." "Misrepresentations?" Valeria raised an eyebrow. "My husband was known for his meticulous accuracy, a quality that ultimately proved unfortunate for him." Cases's implication hung in the air, a barely veiled confession of murder. "We had hoped to resolve this matter privately, but your continued resistance forces more direct measures." Guards moved to block the garden exits. Valeria noted that Lucius had disappeared from his position along the wall, a realization both concerning and potentially promising. "What exactly are you proposing, Senator?" she asked, buying time. "You will sign over your estate to Tribune Flavius as previously discussed. You will then accompany us to your villa, where you will surrender all documents related to grain distribution. After that, he spread his hands in a gesture of false generosity. You'll be free to retire quietly to a modest property in the north, far from Rome's political concerns. And if I refuse," Cases smiled thinly, "then we must conclude you share your husband's dangerous political views. Tragic accidents befall enemies of the state, with unfortunate regularity." The threat spoken so casually in a garden filled with witnesses confirmed what Valeria had suspected. These men believed themselves untouchable, beyond the reach of law or consequence. "I see," she straightened, assuming the dignity that had carried her through court politics for 15 years. "And what of my people, my household staff?" "Collateral concerns," Flavius interjected with a dismissive wave. "Easily managed." A servant hurried into the garden and whispered urgently to Flavius, whose expression darkened. "What do you mean missing?" he demanded loudly enough for all to hear. "Find him." Cassius turned sharply. "What's happened?" "The Gladiator," Flavius replied. "He's disappeared from the gathering." Valeria maintained her composed expression, though her pulse quickened. Lucius was making his move, whatever it might be. Now she needed to play her part. "Perhaps," she suggested calmly, "he simply stepped out for air. The garden is rather crowded." "Or perhaps," Cases countered, advancing toward her, "he's searching the villa for something." Guards find the Gladiator immediately and escort Lady Secundis to the study for her own protection. As two guards moved to take her arms, a commotion erupted at the garden entrance. Shouts, the clash of weapons, then sudden silence. All eyes turned toward the disturbance. A figure appeared in the doorway, bloodied sword in hand. But it wasn't Lucius who stood in the doorway. It was Rufus, the vineyard overseer, his weathered face set in grim determination. "The carriage is ready, Domina," he announced, ignoring the stunned silence around him. "We should leave immediately." The momentary confusion gave Valeria the opening she needed. She twisted free from the guard's loosened grip and moved swiftly toward Rufus, keeping her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. "Indeed, our business here is concluded." Cases recovered quickly. "Stop her," he commanded. But the guards hesitated, uncertain who obey. In the confusion, more commotion erupted from another entrance to the garden. Shouts and the unmistakable sounds of fighting. Demetrius and Castor had engaged the villa guards, creating deliberate distractions. Valeria reached Rufus, who pressed something into her hand, a small dagger concealed within her sleeve. "Lucius?" she asked urgently. "Found what he was looking for," Rufus replied, positioning himself between her and the approaching guards. "Meeting us at the eastern gate," understanding dawned. While she had distracted the conspirators in the garden, Lucius had been searching for evidence. Whatever documents Flavius and Casey's might have relating to the grain conspiracy and her husband's death, the garden descended into chaos as guests scattered, seeking safety from the expanding conflict. Guards rushed toward the various disturbances, unsure which threat to prioritize. Casey's shouted orders that went unheeded. In the confusion, Valeria and Rufus slipped through the doorway, moving quickly through the villa's corridors toward the eastern service entrance. Behind them, the sounds of fighting intensified. "Demetrius and Castor won't be able to hold them long," Rufus warned as they navigated the unfamiliar layout. "They don't need to," Valeria replied. "Just long enough." They rounded a corner and nearly collided with two of Flavius's household guards. Without hesitation, Rufus engaged them, his fighting skills revealing a past far removed from vineyard management. "Go," he shouted to Valeria. "Second corridor on the left." She ran, hitching her stola above her ankles for greater mobility, the dagger clutched in her right hand. The second corridor led to a small courtyard, used for deliveries. Valeria pressed herself against the wall, catching her breath while assessing potential threats. The courtyard appeared empty, save for a cart loaded with wine. No sign of Lucius. She was about to retreat when a soft whistle came from behind the cart, a signal they had established during planning. Lucius emerged from the shadows, clutching a leather document case. Blood streaked his tunic, though he moved without obvious impairment. "You're hurt," she said, moving swiftly to his side. "Not mine," he assured her. "Mostly not mine," he amended, at her skeptical look. "We need to move quickly. I found correspondence between Flavius and the assassins who killed your husband." The confirmation of what they had long suspected hit Valeria with unexpected force. Until this moment, some small part of her had hoped Quintus's death had been a tragic robbery gone wrong, rather than a calculated political assassination. "Rufus is holding off guards near the delivery in trance," she reported, forcing herself to focus on immediate concerns. Demetrius and Castor created diversions in the main garden, and the carriage waiting at the eastern gate. According to Rufus, Lucius nodded quickly, assessing their options. "This courtyard connects to a service path leading east. It's our best route." He handed her the document case. "Keep this secure. It's everything we need to expose them." They had nearly reached the eastern exit when Tribune Flavius himself appeared, flanked by 4 guards. His face was flushed with rage and exertion. "Size them," he commanded. The guards advanced cautiously, clearly recognizing Lucius. Despite his formal attire, his reputation as the Butcher of Capua gave them pause. Even 4 against 1, they knew the odds weren't entirely in their favor. "Get behind me, Lucius," told Valeria, drawing his sword. Instead, she stepped forward, her posture regal despite the danger. "Tribune Flavius," she addressed him directly, "consider carefully what happens next. Killers and copies of my husband's evidence still reach Rome tomorrow. Consul Tiberius already has sealed documents awaiting his return." It was a bluff. Tiberius had no such documents, but Flavius's momentary hesitation suggested it had hit its mark. "She's lying," came his voice as he joined them in the courtyard. "Terius knows nothing of this matter. Are you certain?" Valeria countered. "My husband was thorough in his precautions. Dead messengers and intercepted documents only confirmed his suspicions about your faction." The uncertainty on Flavius's face grew. Casey's recognizing his allies' wavering resolve took control of the situation. "Enough talking. Kill the gladiator. Take the woman alive. We need to know what she's done with the original documents. The guards attacked in coordinated pairs, their military training evident in their disciplined approach. Lucius met them with the calculated precision that had made him legendary in the arena, his movements economical and devastatingly effective. Valeria retreated toward the exit, clutching the document case, torn between escape and unwillingness to abandon Lucius. The fourth guard broke away from the main fight and came for her, sword raised. She had never used a weapon against another human being. The small dagger in her hand seemed woefully inadequate against his sword. Yet, when he lunged, muscle memory from Lucius's training took over. She sidestepped exactly as practiced in those dawn sessions and struck at the exposed area beneath his extended arm. The guard howled in pain, his sword clattering to the stones as he clutched his bleeding side. Valeria stood frozen in shock at what she had done, the bloody dagger still gripped in her trembling hand. "Valeria!" Lucius's shout broke through her gaze. "Run!" She turned to see him fighting the remaining guards with brutal efficiency. But Casey had drawn his own weapon and was circling toward her, rage distorting his aristocratic features. "You think you can destroy everything we've built?" he snarled, advancing, "a merchant's daughter playing at politics." "Not playing," she replied, backing toward the exit. "Winning." With a roar of fury, Casey lunged forward. Valeria dodged, but her stola tangled around her legs. She stumbled, falling hard against the stone wall. The document case slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents across the courtyard floor. Cassius stood over her, sword raised for a killing blow. "Your husband died for those papers. Now, so will you." As the blade descended, a blur of motion intercepted it. Lucius throwing himself between them, catching Cassie's sword with his own. The clash of steel rang through the courtyard. "Not while I live," Lucius growled, forcing Cassie's back with sheer strength. Valeria scrambled to gather the scattered documents while Lucius engaged Casey's in single combat. Despite the senator's obvious fencing training, he was quickly outmatched by Lucius's battlefield experience and arena-honed skill. Disarmed and backed against a column, Cassie's abandoned all pretense of dignity. "You can't kill a senator. The penalty is death." "I'm already dead, according to Rome's records," Lucius replied, his sword at Casey's throat. "A ghost can't be executed twice." Before he could strike the fatal blow, Valeria's voice stopped him. "Lucius, no." He turned, surprise evident in his expression. "We need him alive," she continued, approaching with the refilled document case. "Dead, he becomes a martyr to his allies. Alive, and disgraced, he destroys them all." Lucius hesitated, the battle rage slowly receding from his eyes as her logic penetrated. With a swift movement, he struck Casey with his sword pommel instead, rendering the senator unconscious but alive. Shouts from nearby corridors indicated more guards were approaching. Lucius quickly bound Casey with a torn length of the senator's own expensive toga. "The eastern gate," Valeria reminded him urgently. If Rufus made it through, they fled through the service exit. Lucius half carrying Valeria when her injured ankle threatened to slow them. The path wounded through sculpted gardens toward a small gate in the villa's outer wall, where miraculously their carriage waited, with Rufus at the rails. Quickly he called, already turning the horses toward the road as they scrambled into the carriage. Guards appeared at the villa's main entrance, arrows flying toward them. Lucius pushed Valeria down, shielding her with his body as Rufus whipped the horses into a gallop. The journey back to Valeria's villa became a desperate race. Word would spread quickly, and Cassie's allies would move to intercept them before they could distribute the evidence. Rufus drove the horses at a punishing pace, taking lesser-known coastal paths to avoid the main road. "Demetrius and Castor?" Valeria asked as they bounced over the rough terrain. "Creating confusion," Lucius replied, checking his wound, a shallow gash across his ribs that looked worse than it was. "They'll make their own way back if they can." The documents they'd recovered exceeded their expectations. Not just evidence of corruption in grain distribution, but detailed records of bribes paid to officials, correspondence about Quintus's elimination, And most damning of all, a strategy to manufacture food shortages in rebellious provinces. This explains why they targeted Hispania so aggressively, Lucius said, examining a particular document. The rebellions weren't just about military control, they were about breaking resistance through hunger. Valeria squeezed his hand, understanding what this revelation meant to him personally. We can use this to ensure it doesn't happen again. As they crested the final hill before her estate, a sickening sight greeted them. Smoke rose from the direction of the villa, thick black plumes indicating deliberate fire rather than an accident. No, Valeria whispered, her composure finally cracking. Rufus pulled the horses to a stop at a vantage point, overlooking the property. The main villa was indeed burning, flames consuming the eastern wing where the family quarters were located. Figures moved around the grounds, armed men methodically searching out buildings. Casey had a contingency plan, Lucius observed grimly. If he couldn't get the documents from us at the gathering, he'd take them from your home. Livia, Valeria said, her voice tight with fear. The household staff, we can't help them by rushing in unprepared, Lucius cautioned, though she could see his own concern for the people they'd left behind. We need to assess the situation first. They abandoned the carriage in a grove of olive trees and approached on foot, using the terrace vineyards for cover. As they drew closer, they could see the full extent of the attack. At least a dozen armed men scouring the property. Several buildings already searched and set ablaze. The tunnels, Valeria suggested, referring to the ancient drainage system beneath the older sections of the villa. We can enter undetected and find survivors. Lucius nodded. The tunnel entrance near the old well is likely unguarded. They wouldn't know about it unless Marcus told them. And even he doesn't know all the passages, she added. Quintus showed me sections that haven't been used in generations. They made their way carefully along the property's edge until they reached the abandoned well concealed by overgrown vegetation. The narrow tunnel entrance, hidden behind loose stones, was just as Valeria remembered from her husband's careful mapping of the estate's secrets. The passage was cramped and damp, forcing them to crouch as they navigated by touch more than sight. After what seemed an eternity, they reached a junction where a faint light filtered through a grate above. An air shaft connected to the villa's central atrium. Voices drifted down to them, unfamiliar men discussing their search. Checked the study thoroughly. Nothing there but household accounts. The steward said she kept important documents in her private chambers, which are now ash. The senator won't be pleased. He should have let us kill the household staff after questioning. Witnesses are a liability. Valeria's breath caught. They're alive for now, Lucius whispered, being held somewhere on the property. They continued through the warren of tunnels until they reached the access point. Valeria sought a narrow shaft leading up to the old wine cellar, one of the few areas Marcus didn't oversee directly. The cellar was mercifully empty when they emerged, though sounds of the search continued overhead. Ancient aphri lined the walls, forgotten vintages from previous generations of the estate's owners. The storeroom beyond the kitchen, Lucius suggested, large enough to hold prisoners, only one entrance to guard. They moved cautiously through servant passages until they reached a vantage point overlooking the central courtyard. What they saw confirmed Lucius's theory. 2 armed men guarded the door to the large storeroom, while others continued searching buildings that remained intact. I count 8 men still active, Lucius murmured, plus the 2 guards. Can we free our people without confronting all of them? Perhaps. His eyes narrowed in calculation. But first, we need a distraction. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A commotion at the main gate drew several guards away. Demetrius and Castor had returned, deliberately attracting attention to pull forces from the villa itself. Now, Lucius said, moving swiftly toward the storeroom, while the attention was diverted. The 2 remaining guards never saw him coming. Years of arena training had taught Lucius to kill quickly and silently, when necessary. Valeria looked away from the brief, efficient violence, focusing instead on the storeroom door. Inside, they found the household staff bound and huddled together. Olivia, the kitchen slaves, Even Marcus, his face bruised from apparent questioning. Relief flooded their expressions at the sight of Valeria, alive and unharmed. Quickly, Lucius instructed as he cut their bonds through the wine cellar to the tunnel entrance. Rufus is waiting with the carriage beyond the olive grove. As the freed slaves hurried towards safety, Valeria confronted Marcus. "Why?" she demanded. 30 years of loyalty discarded for what? The steward couldn't meet her eyes. "They threatened my family in Rome, my daughter, my grandchildren. So you betrayed mine instead. I never thought they would harm you," he protested weakly. "Just take the documents by the estate. You would have been compensated like my husband was compensated with a knife in the dark." Marcus flinched. "I didn't know about that. I swear on all the gods." Lucius interrupted their confrontation. "The others are returning. We need to leave now." Valeria gave Marcus one final searching look. "Go with the others. What happens next will determine whether you ever see those grandchildren again." They had almost reached the wine cellar when the main door to the villa burst open. Senator Casey's himself stood in the entrance, his face contorted with fury, blood still crusted on his temple from Lucius's earlier blow. "Tear this place apart stone by stone," he commanded the men behind him. "Find the documents and burn them. No witnesses." Valeria and Lucius pressed into an alcove, momentarily hidden from view. "He must have ridden directly from Flavius's villa," Lucius whispered. "We can still reach the tunnels if." A shout from the courtyard interrupted him. One of the slaves had been spotted fleeing toward the wine cellar. "The tunnels," Casey said, recognition dawning. "Of course, that's how they entered undetected." He turned to his men. "Find the entrance. Kill anyone trying to escape. Their planned route cut off." Lucius pulled Valeria toward the senator's study instead. "The secret compartment," he said urgently. "The one where you found the ledger. They've already searched there." She objected. "Exactly. They won't look again." They slipped into the study unseen, closing the heavy wooden door behind them. As Valeria activated the hidden mechanism to open the wall panel, voices and footsteps approached from the corridor. As Valeria activated the hidden mechanism to open the wall panel, voices and footsteps approached from the corridor. "Take the evidence and escape when they've passed." "No," she resisted, clutching his arm. "Not without you, Valeria." He cupped her face with his battle-scarred hands, his touch incongruously gentle. "Everything we fought for is in that case. It has to survive, even if we don't." The voices drew nearer, decisions that would shape history condensed into seconds. "Trust me," he whispered, pressing his forehead briefly against hers. "I didn't survive 9 years in the arena by dying easily." Before she could protest further, he helped her into the compartment and sealed it closed. Through a tiny crack between panels, Valeria could see a sliver of the study, enough to witness what happened next. The door burst open. Casey entered, followed by 4 armed men. He surveyed the room with obvious frustration. "Where is she?" he demanded of no one in particular. "The documents must not leave this villa." Lucius stood calmly by the window as if merely waiting for their arrival. "Looking for something, Senator." Cashies spun toward the voice, disbelief and rage wearing on his features. The gladiator still playing protector. He gestured to his men. "Kill him slowly." "I wouldn't," Lucius advised. His posture relaxed, despite the weapons trained on him. "Not if you want to see these again." He held up what appeared to be the document case. Valeria's heart stuttered. Had he somehow taken it from her without her noticing? But no, the weight of the real case still pressed against her side within the hidden compartment. This was a diversion. "Hand them over," Casey's order, "and I might let you live like you let Quintus Secundus live." Lucius's voice remained conversational, though Valeria could see the tension in his stance. A predator preparing to strike. "I think not." With a sudden motion, he hurled the false document case through the window behind him. Glass shattered spectacularly as the case tumbled toward the cliffs and sea beyond. "No." Casey rushed to the broken window, watching in horror as what he believed was his salvation disappeared into the gathering dusk. In the moment of distraction, Lucius attacked. He disarmed the nearest guard with brutal efficiency, using the man's own sword to engage the others. The study erupted into chaos, furniture overturned, scrolls and writing implements scattered across the floor, blood spraying across priceless murals. From her hidden vantage point seemed less like protection and more like a prison, forcing Valeria to watch helplessly as Lucius fought for both their lives. When he dispatched the last guard but staggered, blood flowing freely from a wound in his side, she nearly revealed herself. Only the knowledge that doing so would render his sacrifice meaningless kept her hidden, as Cases and Lucius circled each other in the devastated study. "You have lost everything," Lucius told the senator. His breathing labored, but his sword steady. "The documents are gone. By morning copies will reach Rome." "Then I have nothing left to lose," Cases replied, "except the pleasure of killing you myself." Their blades met with a clash that reverberated through the room. Despite his injury, Lucius fought with the accumulated skill of a man who had faced death countless times. Cases, for all his political power, was no match for such experience. Within moments the senator found himself disarmed, and on his knees, Lucius's sword at his throat. "For Quintus Secundus," Lucius said quietly. For Hispania and for Valeria, the blade moved in a swift, decisive arc.